Hey, this is Tom, and today I have a really special treat for you. I had the pleasure of interviewing Alex Huntley of Warp Miniatures. Now, Alex has become one of my favorite sculptors almost ever. His style is just so full of character and dynamics, and he's one of those guys that just translates his vision so well from paper to miniature, even though, as you'll see in the interview, he doesn't always take it in that order. Alex also has this really neat perspective of having come from traditional sculpting and now does most of his work, but not all, in digital. But before we get started, if you're looking for my ultimate quick start guide to sculpting miniatures, just click the link in the description below and you can get started sculpting miniatures today. So sit back and enjoy the interview. Hey Alex, welcome to the Mini Sculpting Super Show. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. So I have been looking at your work. I first found it about 2 years ago on Instagram. I was just scrolling, looking at awesome miniatures, and that pointed me over to your Patreon. And so I'm like looking at this really cool, awesome stylistic work and this digital sculptor. I'm like, man, where did he come from? And I joined the Patreon. I downloaded your starter pack of these awesome characters, and I continued to follow your work. But one thing that I realized after a little while is that you've been doing this for a lot longer than that, and you've even been doing traditional sculpting for quite some time as well. So
yeah. I
I
was going to say, the fact that you kind of discovered my Patreon first, that's quite, recent history for I've been doing this for, 10 years. I founded Warp. My first Kickstarter was in 2013.
Oh, that's very early on.
So I did it at my first year of university. I just thought, my degree was nothing to do with art or anything like that. I just thought, it'd be a little bit of beer money. That should, see how that goes. And, here I am 10 years later. But I actually am traditionally a hand sculptor, and I sculpted by hand for many, many years. I didn't actually learn ZBrush until 2020. It was actually my COVID project was to finally crack digital sculpting, and I launched my Patreon in May 2020, and that just took off. And my Patreon has been absolutely having that kind of regular source of income month by month has been absolutely life-changing. And I keep my traditional sculpting kind of for my passion projects, because I definitely like to keep the craft alive, but it does take a lot longer than digital. Digital has kind of opened me up to go from idea to miniature so much quicker. It was absolutely life-changing.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's something that I was noticing as I was kind of starting to study your work, because, well, one, I love the amount of character and style that you inject into these while still making them work as great miniatures. And I can tell, you're just really, you're almost you're sculpting with it like it's digital clay. But you're using the technology that, not having to wait for something to dry or cure, and you just seems like you're moving
Absolutely.
a lot faster. But we'll get into that a little more. Before we get too far, I wanted you to take a moment just to tell everybody about what it is you do. Tell us about Warp and the Patreon and what that's all about.
Awesome. So Warp is a very small little family business. That's me and my mum and dad. We create fancy miniatures for gamers, collectors, painters, the entire spectrum of the hobby. We have two ranges that we produce. The first one, which we kind of touched on briefly before, is my Digital Workshop, which is a 3D printable range that's kind of generic fantasy for any kind of tabletop game, like RPGs, like tabletop gaming, wargaming, all with like a kind of a cartoony style to it. Like I do have a consistent style across my two ranges, but that's STLs purely for folks with 3D printers. And then my second range is ArcWorlde, which is my tabletop game. Now that is miniatures that are cast in resin and metal. My dad is our in-house resin caster, and I'm very confident in saying he is like one of the best casters in the industry. Like, customers of mine will sing his praises the high heavens. And my mum, she's involved with all of the distribution side, so she packs the orders, kind of makes sure that everything gets to everyone in one piece, and she goes into overdrive around Kickstarter time as well. And then I sculpt everything. I'm the writer, the rules writer, the illustrator, the kind of the creative hub of Warp. But ArcWorlde, as I said, is a tabletop game. It's kind of a skirmish-ish kind of thing. We call it a narrative battle game. It has kind of little elements of RPG in it as well. Like, it's very kind of beer and pretzels style games. Very, very casual, very kind of narrative driven.
Very cool.
And all of the miniatures are either hand sculpted or kind of, as I made the kind of the transition to digital in the past couple of years, like I mainly make the ArcWorlde models in digital as well, but they're printed very, very high quality and still cast in resin and metal. But I still do hand sculpt some pieces, particularly the larger models, because I can take a lot of time with it, because it is very much my passion project.
That's neat to hear you say that, because I'm the same way. I do most of my commission work is digital, but I still do. I really enjoy doing traditional from time to time. So I'll work a special little piece into my own releases. It's neat to be able to go back. Yeah. Plus, if you ever do any converting, it's nice to keep up those skills.
No, absolutely. And like, even with my digitally sculpted ArcWorlde models, there's always little bits that I'll just add on in putty. Like I'll add a rock here, or just, and obviously part of there's a lot more limitations in what you can do with models that are destined to be cast, particularly in metal. So, there's lots of like gap filling and things that, things I didn't spot when it was in said brush. Like, I like to kind of, one of the benefits of one of my casters being my dad is that I'll give them to him and be like, right, Dad, what do you think of this? He's like, well, that won't cast, that needs to be changed. Oh, you're making this difficult for me, aren't you? And I'm like, yes, but Dad, you wouldn't be as good of a caster if I didn't challenge you.
I've been there. That's a good point.
Miniature.
I'm going to use that on my guys next time. Oh, that's great. Well, before we get too farther deep into it, I want to spend some good time talking to you about how you sculpt and how you come up with your designs and things like that. But what's going on for Warp Miniatures right now?
Ooh, right now, other than monthly releases, so my monthly Patreon release, I'm actually collaborating with quite a big webcomic called The Weekly Roll. They do a kind of 4-panel webcomics, D&D characters and things like that, and that has been a really, really fun experience. Like, Malcolm, who's the artist behind it, has been wonderful, and we've had a really amazing response from not only his community but my community as well, so that's been a really fun project. But what's really big and happening at the moment is I'm running a Kickstarter for a huge art and lore book for ArcWorlde, because I'm so focused on sculpting the miniatures and keep writing the rules. I've never had the chance to properly kind of set the lore in stone. Like, I've kind of touched on a lot of things in previous editions of the game and stuff, but this is my opportunity to really kind of write down what ArcWorlde is about, illustrate it to the best of my ability, and create a really nice, bigger than A4 hardback full color book. So it's a real kind of labor of love, but that's on Kickstarter at the moment. I've sculpted a few miniatures as well, but the book. It's been a long time coming, and I feel really, really good to finally be able to kind of show people what I've been working on.
Yeah, and everybody, you should go check this out as soon as possible. But when this video goes up, the Kickstarter should have about a day left. So go search the ArcWorlde Compendium or look for Warp Miniatures in their Kickstarters. This thing is gorgeous, and what I like the most about it, I mean, it's full of all this lore, which is great, but it really gives Alex a chance to show up. He makes so much. He makes all this art. He makes the miniatures. He draws stuff. Are you doing the design too? The layouts?
No.
Okay.
So I'm actually collaborating with. Yeah, I mean, I've got a journeyman's knowledge of graphic design, but I think for my kind of magnum opus thing, I was like, no, I need to actually work with somebody who knows what they're doing, because I'm very much a victim of that kind of self-employed person's mentality of, I'll give it a go. Like, I can just wear all these different hats, but like I've not being able to properly graphic design has bitten me in the past. Like, things haven't quite been printed out exactly how I want it, and I'm like, okay, no, like this time I want it to be absolutely perfect. So I'm working with a guy called Craig, who owns a company called Dizzy Inc. in Nottingham, where I live, and we're working together on putting the layout together. He'll be collaborating with the printers, making sure that everything's looking slick, and also making it, I mean, the stuff that we've been kind of working on together has been looking really nice. Like, he's really
it looks fantastic.
Kind of laying it out. Like, an idea he came up with, which I hadn't even considered, but I think is really cool, is he's used a page size and kind of dimension called foolscap, which is a really old dimensions from like the 1500s, 1600s, and it's like A4. It's A4-ish, but it's a little narrower, but quite long. So it's kind of like a very long and narrow page, and it just makes, and he's using like fonts that are like digitized versions of the old printing fonts that they used in like the 16th century as well. So it's going to look really, really cool.
Yeah, that really exciting. That really complements the style of the world you have going on in your art, and just with everything you're creating, it's really neat to see this art book, for lack of a better term, but filled with so much more. So
thank you.
Yeah, very, very cool.
Yeah,
and there'll be a link down in the description for anybody that wants to check it out. Well, that is awesome. Yeah. So good luck on that, and we'll hopefully it'll continue to soar by
Thanks,
when
man.
this is, everybody's watching this right now. It'll be even farther on than it is right now. So
exciting.
Is it killing you? I mean, I know I ran Kickstarters. It's always, you just always feel like you're on so much.
Oh, like I guess part of being self-employed and like having like 3 different projects running at the same time is, as you said, you are always on to some capacity all the time. But when it's Kickstarter time, it just ramps everything up, because everything you do, it's like, oh damn, like how can I spend the time during the Kickstarter in the best amount? Because you're like, oh, I've got this to do, but oh no, I could be doing this. I could be doing this. I could be doing this. I could be sharing it this. I could be sharing it this. And then there's also wrestling with people's seemingly just like antagonistic attitude towards anyone who they think is trying to sell them something on social media.
Yeah.
Like, Reddit hates me in particular. Like, I've had so many like comments and private messages from like the mods of the miniature painting subreddit, just like, don't share stuff that you're selling. And I'm like, but I'm still painting miniatures, it's still my hobby.
Yeah.
Like, can't I show off my work? And also, where do you think all the miniatures that you're painting come from? Like, if you can't support people who are making the models that you're painting, then they're not going to make any more models for you. And they'll go out of business.
Yeah, it's always a challenge to navigate all the different. I don't even know. Sometimes I feel like the rules that they get you on aren't even there, but that's a whole nother debate. But I think that's a very smart tactic, because you're not just putting up an advertisement, you're painting your miniature that it happens to be yours. And that's something that's really cool too. I didn't mention. We'll just jump in that right now. You're like this super jack of all trades. You're sculpting, you're painting the miniatures, you're drawing designs, you're designing the game, right? That you did that as well.
Yeah.
Are you doing all the photography and everything?
If you can call what I do photography, like my level of photography is very much like hold the miniature in my hand, take a picture with my phone, cut it out in Photoshop, and then put it on the background.
Well, it looks
because
good.
like, I mean, number one, like, I'm not a photographer. Photography is a whole different art form that I couldn't even fathom. Like, you couldn't even start to delve into. But also, what I've actually found is that people respond a lot better to more DIY photographs. Like, if you post a picture on a Facebook group or Instagram of a hyper slick picture, or like in a nice, like, and all of that, it just goes over people's heads, because they're like, that's an ad. That's an ad. It just glaze over. Whereas if, as I mentioned before, if you just take a picture like this, go click, and it's like, I've painted this, or I've sculpted this, what do you guys think? People are way more likely to kind of interact with it, because they're more likely to be like, oh, this person's a fellow hobbyist, and what they've made is really cool, rather than this is a faceless corporation trying to sell me something.
And that's very important for businesses like yours, where it is you, and even if you are using other people, which is totally fine. We just have this tendency to, like you said, take on everything ourselves, even more so as creatives. But that's a really cool pro tip, everybody. Focus on the DIY. Don't always have to show the most polished.
No, like, it's true. Like, I think there's this real kind of, and this is not just obviously with our industry, but with every kind of small business, there's this, you just think, oh, I've got to make it look as professional as possible. Like, I need to make everything look on par with these big companies. But what, in my experience, and it might be different for others, is that the more you step away from the kind of the hobby aspect and the DIY aspect, people like to buy things from creators. People they like to see the person behind the hobby, the things that they buy, the things that they love. And if you try and make it super slick and corporate, people don't have that same kind of connection. Now, there is another kind of conversation to be had about slick and corporate making it look like it's DIY. And I think with like TikTok and stuff like that, and Instagram Reels and stuff, there is very much a wider move towards that DIY feel of just, oh, I'm just a person creating it with influencers and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it takes a lot for some people, particular corporations. It takes a lot of skill to make something look casual. But I think for people who are a little less experienced, like myself, just make it casual. That makes literally just be a person with a phone camera, and people are a lot more likely to interact with you.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into some. I've got a couple questions here. Well, I've got several, but I want to. People come here to learn about sculpting and hear about miniatures. Although I get a lot of questions about the business side, so this is all great. But I want to try and dig in a little bit more about on that side of things. So you said so digital is rather recent for you, but you're very accomplished. And you said, did you say your first Kickstarter was around 2013?
Yeah.
Man, that's
so my
crazy.
first Kickstarter was
awesome.
my first year of university in 2013. Yeah, and as I said before, I was just thinking, oh, it's just my hobby. I raise a bit of money to spend on beers and parties and things like that. And I don't want to talk shop too much, but 2013 was kind of like the perfect primordial soup for indie games at the time, because obviously the big boys, Games Workshop, weren't in too hot of a place at that time. I think people were getting quite disenfranchised with Warhammer and with 40k and stuff. So they're like, oh, let's see what else is out there. And it's around the time that like Mantic launched, and they fed very much off that kind of that group of gamers and hobbyists that wanted something a little different. And I started my business. I was very lucky to start it just in that right time where there were a lot of people out there that were like, oh, this kid's new, this kid's doing something, because I was 20 at the time, and a lot of people took a big chance on me, and I was incredibly grateful at the time, but it really kind of showed to me that I could make a career out of this. It wasn't just something that I could just do as a hobby, because like I've always been an arty person, and like art was always my passion as a kid, and I was encouraged to follow other career choices. My degree at the time was in human genetics, because I was like, science. So I was the first person in my family to go to university, so they're like, do well, go to university, and particularly 10 years ago, I think degrees it hadn't got to the point of oversaturation of degrees, so like you were more likely to get a job if you had a degree. So I went in. It wasn't really for me. My passion was miniatures. It always has been, and as I said, I just started it, and then I quit my course 2 years later and went into miniatures full time.
Oh wow! So you didn't finish it. You just said, this is working. This is what I want to do. That's awesome. So.
Well, yeah. Well.
I was just gonna say. Like, when did you first start sculpting then? Because did you like pick it up? Did you just say, I play with miniatures all the time. I feel like sculpting one. I'll sculpt a couple and put it on Kickstarter, or had you been doing some miniatures before then?
So, as with, I guess, most people who get into sculpting, my first introduction to it was kind of converting. Like Games Workshop miniatures, or like Warhammer. Like my first miniatures that I got into was, do you remember like 2001-ish, where Games Workshop, I'm not sure if you guys had it in the US, but there was a weekly or bi-weekly magazine around the Lord of the Rings miniatures.
We had a lot going on for that, and there might have been, but I don't recall that personally.
Yeah. Oh, it was amazing. Like, so Games Workshop released it like every week or every 2 weeks. It would have a plastic sprue and then some little paint pots and brushes and things, and it was very much like an introduction to miniatures. And I got bought that, and I got really into it, and I collected Lord of the Rings miniatures for a while, and it got to a point where I was like, this is kind of cool, but I feel quite restricted to make things that are in the movies. Like, I feel like I can't do too much interesting stuff. And then I was introduced to Warhammer, and that kind of opened the floodgates for me, because I had this very open world, and I started kit bashing, kind of sculpting little bits here and there. And then when I was about 14, I started some blogs on the forums at the time, and I remember those, like gaming forums, and I had blogs that kind of followed the progression of me making miniatures or armies and things, and they went really, really well. And I think I know a lot of the reason why my first Kickstarter in 2013 did so well was because I built up this following since I was a teenager over the years, and when I finally got to the point where I was able to release stuff, people were like, boom, yeah, let's go. However, what was interesting is when I first released casts of sculptures, obviously, I started with kit bashing, and then I built up the confidence to create whole sculptures, and I released my first sculptures. I used some commission money that I'd got converting some bits for some of my followers to pay for the first cast run, and I was like, right guys, I finally got it stuff cast, like it's ready to go. You're really liking this stuff. I'm ready. Throw your money at me. Let's go. And I couldn't give them away. Like I sold a few. Like I sold maybe like six or seven, which is still, you know, a great amount. But there wasn't that kind of. I got quite disillusioned at the time of like, oh, but you guys, like, you know, thousands of people are following my stuff, but no one's, you know, that kind of teenage realization that, oh, not everything people say on the internet is actually going to translate into actual action. But my kind of mindset at the time was like, oh, the reason why they're not buying it is because I need a reason to buy it. I'm going to write a game. I'm going to create a game and a lore and stuff for all my miniatures. And at the time, I wasn't really like super confident about rules writing and things. So I did collaborate with someone at the time, and then they wrote like the first draft of the game. And then I eventually took it to Kickstarter, and it just went boom.
Awesome.
Went huge. And I was like, oh my god. I think the first Kickstarter, I think, made £53,000.
That's incredible.
Which is like $70,000. I think at the time it was more like $90,000.
Yeah,
obviously
much better
conversion.
Yeah, for you guys.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my god, like, because you know, I was literally my first year of university, and yeah, I'd hoped it would do well, but I'd never expected it to do that well. But like, I was kind of a victim of my own success at the time, because obviously you get a bit carried away with the Kickstarters, you promise loads of stretch goals, and then I thought, oh, I actually have to start, I have to start sculpting everything, and I have to start illustrating everything and writing everything. So, you know, I spent the next 2 years essentially fulfilling that Kickstarter. And then I got to, you know, I was about 4 months to go on my course. Like, I wasn't doing that well because I've been spending all my time making miniatures, like literally barely attending classes because I was trying to do all this stuff. So I was like, right, I feel like I'm at a crossroads. Either I quit now and just completely dedicate myself to this, or I stay on, try and scrape as good a grade as I can, and then kind of keep this as, you know, like a lucrative side project. And a couple of things happened in my life that kind of really made me realize, like, I need to like grab this. Like, this is my passion. Anything else is just, I'm like, this is it. Like, I want to do this. This is my life's goal, to be like a full-time creator in the miniatures industry. So I did, and my parents didn't speak to me for like 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh, but now they're helping you do it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, obviously, you know, like at the time they weren't as involved as they are now. And they were just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, you're giving up on your career, your lucrative career as a scientist, which I think people who actually work in the sciences will know how laughable that is. Particularly biology. But yeah, I think over time, like, I worked really, really hard. Like, I got a lot of help. I got a lot of luck. But you know, I managed to make it into a career, and eventually, you know, my parents kind of chipped in. In fact, the reason why my dad started casting for me was because I picked up some casts from the person who was casting for me at the time, and he was like, "Oh, Alex, how much you paid for those?" And I said, "Oh, this amount." And he's like, "That's too dear. That I reckon I could give that a go." Within like 6 months, he'd mastered it.
Oh wow! Yeah. So this isn't something that he previously was doing. He just figured I can.
No, not
at
all.
That's awesome.
Well, my dad is one of those generation of men that just can figure things out, very practical. Like he's a handyman now, but he's kind of had lots of different jobs, but he's always had that very like problem solving mind.
That's cool.
And he's through trial and error and YouTube and some help from other people in the industry who kind of gave him some tips, he just sussed it out with his dad powers. And he's, as I said, he's now, I can say quite comfortably, one of the best casters in the industry. And I'm incredibly lucky to have him as part of the team.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you still have any of the first miniatures you ever made? You have those laying around anywhere?
I do, actually, yeah.
You don't have to show them now, but...
no, not right here. I mean, they are locked away somewhere because I cannot bear to look at them.
Have you ever showed them off, or is that just something you did and it's what it is?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, so interestingly, I'm doing a big event this year in Nottingham at the ArcWorlde weekend because it's the 10 years of ArcWorlde. Yes. I did my first project in 2013, so it's a big event. It's one of the reasons why I decided to launch the Compendium this year, because I thought it'd be a really cool kind of 10-year celebration. But I'm also doing I do like a yearly event in Nottingham. But this year we're going a bit bigger with it. I've got a new venue that I'm hosting it at, so there's scope to kind of have lots of displays and stuff. Cool. And I have been thinking about showing off some of my really old stuff to kind of show like, oh, this is the kind of the progression of how things have developed up until this point. But I have a crippling dislike of anything that I made more than like 4 years ago. So I'm like, oh no, I don't want people, because like it's kind of like a running joke in the ArcWorlde community about how much I hate my old models, and how much all the community like love my old models just because they're old. And it's like because like people will be like, oh, like I managed to find like this model on eBay like that you made like 8 years ago, and they're showing it off on the Facebook group, and I'm like, no, don't look at that one, it looks like it's made of chewing gum, like stop it. But yeah, it's like I must say, like, moving to digital has very much allowed me to be as kind of like finicky and tweaky as possible, whereas obviously like, but it's interesting because now that I'm used to digital, I feel like my standards, my hand sculpted stuff have gone up as well, because I'm so used to being able to have so much control in ZBrush that when I make something by hand, I'm like, no, this has to be as good as if it had been sculpted digitally, which is interesting because when I first started digital, I was like, this has to look just as good as if I'd made it by hand.
Yeah,
it's interesting how it's switched.
It is, yeah, but you bring up a good point that a lot of times, even if you do something digitally that looks good or better, there tends to be this issue people have where it looks digital, even if it's great. It doesn't look. It doesn't. It's missing some of that artist touch, that real quality, I've found. But you've certainly overcome that. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I do think that, I mean, this is something that I've spoken about quite a bit with other sculptors who've made the jump to digital from traditional. I think if you are a traditional sculptor, you have a better sense of what works as a miniature when making things digitally. Like, you know exactly how much detail to put on without it being overly detailed. You know how thick to make certain aspects. You know, kind of how things work in a 3D space rather than just on a screen. And I think it really does help. And making something by hand does help you kind of imagine how something will look whilst you're making it on a screen.
Yep, I agree completely.
Yeah,
it's. Yep, it's you can see it a lot with. I mean, there's plenty of very talented fully digital or who started digitally, but in most of those cases, if you watch their work progress, it takes them a while to get to that point where they're making good miniatures, especially if they're going to try and cast it. You know, when people are just doing STLs, you still, you know, need to be a little cognizant of the strength of things, but it's a lot more forgiving than when you have to mold it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can make... I mean, obviously, there are things to consider when making things for STLs still, but it's way more forgiving than if you're making something to be cast in resin or metal.
So before we get too far away from the traditional, I wanted to ask you, what materials did you first start sculpting in? And then you would sculpt in as you got better, and then obviously you're still sculpt now. Are they the same materials? Have you evolved into other materials than you began with? What do you like to sculpt with?
So when I like sculpt with. So when I first started, I mean, most people who get into sculpting via Games Workshop always get introduced to green stuff first. I was introduced to green stuff, and I just didn't get it. I just didn't like it. Like, it was too plasticky. Like, I just didn't get it. But so my grandma, who was very much like, she lived with us. She was like a third parent. She was the arty one, and she was the person that, you know, facilitated my artiness as a kid. And she suggested that I use something called Milliput, which she says it's not the same, but it's a lot cheaper, and we can buy it in this shop. So I got it, and I really liked it, but what I found was a mixture of green stuff and Milliput together as a composite, and I had the best qualities of both. So I used that, and then, as we all do as creatives, I got distracted by other kinds of clay. Like, I worked with Magisculpt for a while.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah, I worked with other kind of was it Fimo? Worked with Fimo for a little bit. There was another one, I can't remember. They had like a kind of a flesh, like a slightly translucent flesh-coloured
Super Sculpey
one. That's the one, I think. It was Super Sculpey, and it was all right. But number one, I didn't like how it couldn't be as easily carved as like the green stuff Milliput mix, because carving is a big part of my sculpting process when working traditionally, and also like the idea that you couldn't, like, I feel the time restraint of working with a material that hardens works for me, just because it adds a sense of urgency to it. So, because I think, you know, there are some people, sculptors who I know, like, oh yeah, I tinkered at this for like a year. I didn't bake it for a year because I was just doing a little bit, and then I resculpted it. Where I was like, nope, 20 minutes for this layer, let's go. Which is, I guess, kind of encouraged me to be a much more spontaneous sculptor. I think particularly when I first started out with ArcWorlde, I would say my style was very sketch-like. Like, it was quite rough. There was lots of like kind of rough edges. Like, it very much felt like it was like made by hand. Like, it wasn't fine detail. It was very kind of, I call it my chewing gum phase. Because it literally was it was like I was going da, 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 like just attacking it, and you know, a lot of people in my community really like that, but I was never quite happy with it because I just didn't feel refined enough. I struggled to get that kind of those clean lines and stuff that I'd seen in other hand sculptors that I admired, and that just got better with time and practice and confidence. And now that I've kind of moved to digital, now that is, even though I still try to kind of keep that hand sculpted look that I have, like, the fact that I can be a lot more kind of, you know, slick with it has kind of definitely tickled something in my brain where I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. Finally, after all these years.
That's very cool. I was gonna ask you. What was the first thing you did sculpt? Like, first complete miniature?
the first. So is this the first ever complete miniature that I sculpted ever, or the first complete miniature that I cast?
Ever.
Ever. It was. I was in a Warhammer club when I was 11 years old.
Oh man, I wish I had a Warhammer club.
Yeah. and one of the older boys was converting a model, and he had some green stuff, and I was like, oh, can I play that? Because I'd always made stuff out of like clay and plasticine and things like that, but he showed me this clay, and I made like a little squig, just a tiny little squig, just with my fingers, what I could like roll up and stuff like that. And that, I would say, that was my first full sculpt. But like in terms of like wargaming, but like I'd been model making since I was a very, very young child. Like my grandmother was a sculptor herself, so she worked in clay and pottery mainly. But I've always had that kind of creative presence as a child, and I think it really, she very much encouraged me to get into art and get into sculpting, and I think her influence was one of the many reasons why I kind of stuck at the hobby, because I think, in my experience, like I first got into Games Workshop miniatures when I was about 8 or 9-ish. And all my school friends did as well, but then they all kind of got distracted by the things, but I stuck at it, and I think one of the reasons why I stuck at it was because I had this space with my grandma where she was very much encouraging me to kind of keep up this hobby because it was so creative.
Awesome. Well, one of the other things I wanted to touch on is your style. It has so much life and energy and excitement. So I wanted you to know if you could share a little bit about what are some things that have inspired you or that helped you develop that style, and why'd you do that rather than ending up sculpting typical comic book character 7 heads high, or just emulating Games Workshop, because your stuff has even more, they used to, and they do sometimes now, have a lot of that character and dynamics, but it's a little rigid at times, and yours is just so dynamic.
Thank you. So I would say that obviously this isn't a hard and fast rule, but I've been more influenced by illustrators in my style rather than sculptors. So one of my favourite authors of all time is Terry Pratchett, and a particular artist who illustrated for him is Paul Kidby. He's like what does a lot of the kind of the later Discworld novels, and his style, I would say, is possibly the most influential on my style. Like, he has that kind of slightly cartoony stuff, and so that was hugely influential for me. I'm also very much inspired by like old school Warhammer. So like one of the things that one of my like snarky comments when I was a teenager was just like, I don't know why people take Warhammer so seriously and everything so serious. We're grown people playing with toy soldiers. Why does everything have to be grimdark all the time? So I very much lent into the more kind of light-hearted fairy tale like stuff that the older Games Workshop miniatures had, because that's what really resonated with me. And I guess just I sculpted what made me feel good, and then over time that really kind of focused. And I think also because I'm self-taught, I wasn't tutored to be a sculptor. Everything was trial and error. I think because I just kind of created in this bubble where I wasn't really, I wasn't actively taught a certain style. It allowed me to kind of create my own style. And yeah, that's just, I guess, been refined over the years, I guess it's like 15 years that I've been sculpting miniatures for now.
When your illustration style and your sculpting style, they go hand in hand. Do you tend to do concept art for yourself first and then sculpt, or the other way? Do you just draw what you sculpt, or a little bit of both?
Funnily enough, I'd actually say that 9 times out of 10 I do the illustration after I've sculpted the miniature. Like, I find that, I mean, I think generally it's because I sculpt a lot more than I draw. At least I did do until I started working on the book. And I so much of the sculpting process for me is kind of discovering the model as I make it. Like, obviously I have a rough idea of what I want in terms of like pose and costume and things like that. That very much kind of almost naturally appears as I work on things. I think, this could be cool. Oh, this could be cool. Oh, this could be cool. And then once it's a finished piece, I'm like, now I can draw it. Now that it's kind of set, now I can draw it. Which
that is so
seems
funny.
a bit odd.
Yeah.
I know it's
well.
weird.
I know other people that do it that way too. It's just so backwards from what I do. I'm literally the exact opposite. I want to noodle with a pencil and figure out every little thing. And when I go to sculpt it, it's almost like I'm in engineer mode, where I'm just working out those problems, but I don't have to discover the character like you said. But that's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, of course. Although it is interesting that now that I'm working on my ArcWorlde lore book, I'm doing a lot of art of characters that I haven't sculpted yet, and it's quite interesting kind of drawing something for the book and thinking, oh yeah, I'd make quite a good model actually.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of setting myself up for sculpts in the future, and they'll probably not take me as long because I've already done the design. It's almost as if this concept art thing is a good idea and I should probably do it more often.
Well, whatever works, you're what you're doing is working, and if that works too, go for it. No, that's awesome. So, you said something about how you work on and bring life into the models. Could you talk a little bit about your sculpting process? Like, I guess what I'm most interested in is how you are able to capture this traditional look, but digitally. When working digitally, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by all the tools at your disposal and how you can make everything so crisp and clean and defined. So if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about kind of how you approach sculpting figures digitally, I'd love to hear it.
Awesome. So I would say there are 2 major things that really help me kind of get that kind of hand sculpted style. First one is that I try to replicate the sculpting process as closely as I would if I was doing digital. No, doing traditional. So I use like 5 brushes, and those brushes are like the move, like polish, like clay build up, like up cracks, like very much aping that kind of process of like building up in layers, putting on putty, carving it away and stuff like that. So I think that really helps, that I very much, everything on the model is sculpted rather than rather than trying to kind of like import like pre-made STLs and things. I mean, obviously, like I have dollies and things that I use to speed up the process, like hands, and like I have like a stock human or like dolly that I kind of warp and change depending on like what I'm working on. But everything else has been, even if I've kind of replicated it, it's very much been sculpted by me. Another thing I would say is that particularly with my Patreon stuff, I'm on an incredibly tight schedule. So I don't have time to kind of dilly-dally and make everything super crisp. So I'm like, right, no, it has to be sculpted as quick as possible. Go, 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 go. And I find that kind of, it's like harkening back to that sketchy style sculpting that I used to do when I was traditionally sculpting. And actually one of the reasons why I did that was the same reason why I do it with my digital stuff, because at the time I'd just done this massive Kickstarter and I needed to get all these models sculpted as quickly as possible. So I was just like, right, just go, sculpt it, let's go. And that's the same with my Patreon stuff. I'm like, this needs to be made by the end of the month, come what may. You haven't missed a month, this needs to be done. And that can do wonders for encouraging you not to be too nitpicky about stuff. And I think that rough and ready style helps the hand sculpted style of the miniatures.
Yeah, absolutely. How many? So you're doing this full time, but you're doing a lot more than just sculpting. About how many sculpts are you doing a month nowadays?
Ooh, now that really depends. Because, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I do for my Patreon is like multi-part kits. So obviously lots of heads, lots of bodies, lots of arms and things. Like, one of the great things about 3D printing and something that is really good for particularly the tabletop gaming community is you can print off as much stuff as you want. So I really want to kind of create kits that people can utilize for that. So like you could, if I make like a multi-part goblin kit, for example, you could print 500 goblins and make every single one slightly different, because all the arms are on ball and socket joints, so you could have it do every one is slightly different. So I don't really have a hard and fast number. It's like this month, for example, with my weekly roll miniatures that I was talking about before, there's like 6 or 7 models in the kit. But every model is very much like a character, like very much like that.
Unique.
Took a lot more.
You're not going to be able to just use a template to bang out a bunch of different ones.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly because they have to be identical to the comics as well. It's a much more different creative endeavor than just being like, right, I'm going to make a kobold multi-part kit. It needs 5 heads, 5 bodies, 10 arms, 10 legs, and you just boom, do it. So, but yeah, like I would say, people tell me that I'm a very fast sculptor. I like to think it's just because I'm impatient and I just want to kind of get them done as soon as possible. But it's also having an unwavering deadline hanging over you every month teaches you to be quick.
Well, it's very admirable. The amount of I actually just bought some ArcWorlde miniatures the other day, and they're amazing. Yep. I got the little halfling wizard that's kind of floating, and hobgoblins. Yeah, they're awesome.
Where'd you get them from?
From you.
From me?
Yeah.
Halfling wizard that's floating.
Well, maybe it's not a halfling. It's a little wizard. Let me find it. I just had it over here somewhere. Oh no, I put it away. Anyways,
oh no!
It might not be a halfling.
Like,
it's a small little person.
What kind of pose is he doing? What kind of pose is he doing? I'm curious.
Kind of up like this with a little wand.
Oh, what? That's an old model.
Is that an old one?
Is he called Bibbington Bells?
That might be. Let's see. It's under the wizards.
Model.
Is it really? Let's see. I'm finding it right now.
Maybe?
I'm finding it right now. All right, where'd it go? It was under wizards, I think. There we go. Wizards. Okay. It is Mary McSpell. Sorry, no wand.
Oh. Oh, yeah. She's cool.
Yeah, that is an awesome miniature.
Thank you very much.
I totally lost track of what I was saying, but yeah, very cool stuff. Oh no, that's what I was saying. Like I when I was looking at at everything you've done for ArcWorlde, and obviously the volume of things you've done for Patreon, it's very impressive. Even considering 10 years, and especially when you think about it's all your own pieces and this whole world you've built and developed. So everybody should definitely check that out.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, cool. Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about or share before we start to wind things down?
I'm not sure. I felt like I kind of did my plug at the start.
All right. Well, let's do this.
Actually,
go ahead.
One thing. So I obviously, as I said, I'm doing my book Kickstarter at the moment for ArcWorlde, but I'm actually hot on the heels of that one. I'm doing a miniature-based ArcWorlde Kickstarter on Halloween. It's a new faction for the game, and it's vampires. So everything's going to be very spooky.
I think I've seen some of that on Instagram. Yeah, it looks very cool.
You might have done, because I have and this is something I'm working on. But I have an awful habit of, as soon as something is made, I just post it immediately, rather than being actually strategic about my marketing. I'm just like, oh, I've made a thing. Look at the thing. So no, it's something my fiance very much is like, Alex, you can't just show stuff immediately. Like, you have to actually have a game plan when you're making releases. Like, you need to be more smart about it. And as I said, I'm getting better, but it's very much like, no, I want to show everyone everything. But more information about that will be released once the law book Kickstarter is done. But
awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll have everybody make sure and check that out too as it comes. So to wrap things up, let's have go ahead and share where are the best places to find you at. And I'll put these links down, but just mention it as well. That way I'll remember to grab all the right links and whatnot.
So you can find me on Instagram at Warp Miniatures. You can find me on Twitter, or X or whatever it's called now, at Warp Miniatures. Facebook, Warp Miniatures Facebook page. I've got a YouTube channel as well, but I don't upload that much. But there's some quite interesting stuff on there if you're interested in what I do. I think that's everything. Right?
Patreon and obviously
absolutely.
Your website.
Yes, my website is www.warpminiatures.com. Patreon is patreon.com/warpminiatures, and my mini factory, which is where I sell my STLs as well, which I once the Patreon month is over, I put STLs up for sale. That is myminifactory.com/users/warpminiatures.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put all those down, link below. Everybody should go check out all of these awesome Warp Miniatures, ArcWorlde things, and help support Alex. Keep this going.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And before we shoot out, I just want to tell everybody that I actually hit me that I needed to talk to Alex more, because he was actually on my good friend Sean Sutter's show, The Relic Buds. And so if you'd like
Sculpting Buds.
Yeah, Sculpting Buds. If you'd like to check out even more, get a little kind of a different side of things and hear more about Alex and Sean and what they're doing, check out that episode, and I'll put that down in the description as well. All right.
Awesome.
Well, thanks again for being on, Alex, and I hope we get to do this again sometime. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Well, until next time, everybody, keep sculpting.